My name is Robert Hale, and I am 59 years old. 3 weeks ago, my son and my daughter sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me to stop calling them. I smiled. I nodded. I said I understood. Then I drove to my lawyer's office and I signed a document that had been waiting for me for 11 years. The next morning, my son tried to close on a house he did not own. The bank called him within the hour. My daughter tried to access an account that no longer existed in the form she remembered. Both of them called me at the same time, back to back, their names lighting up my phone one after the other. I let it ring. I made coffee instead. I have never tasted coffee that good in my life. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 11 years, to a kitchen that smelled like cedar and burnt coffee, when my mother told me something I did not understand until 3 weeks ago. I grew up in a house on Larkspur Lane, but the house that mattered most to me was 3 streets over, where my mother, Eleanor Hale, lived alone after my father passed. I was already a grown man by then, already married, already raising my own children in that same neighborhood. But some part of me never stopped being her son first, and some part of her never stopped needing me to be. Her kitchen smelled like cedar shelves and burnt coffee, a smell I still cannot describe to anyone who did not grow up in it, sweet and bitter at once, like a memory that's already turning into something else. The floor by the back door creaked in the exact same spot every single time, a small groan of old wood that told her exactly who had walked in before she even turned around. I used to test it on purpose, just to hear her call my name without looking. "Robert, is that you?" Already smiling before she saw my face. She kept a wooden cigar box on the top shelf of her pantry, tucked behind the flour and the good tea she never used. The kind of box that had once held something ordinary and now held something no one could see. I asked her once, as a grown man, what was inside it. She wiped her hands on her apron, not looking at me directly, and said, "Paper doesn't mean anything until the day it does, Robert. Then it means everything." I was 31 years old. I laughed, gently, and thought she was being dramatic, the way older women sometimes are about small, mysterious objects. My children, Daniel and Claire, grew up half in my house and half in hers. She fed them Sunday dinners of roast chicken and burnt butter potatoes, the good china out even on a Tuesday if she felt like it, cloth napkins she ironed herself, though no one ever asked her to. Daniel loved her stories about the war years, about ration cards and blackout curtains, and he would sit at her feet on the kitchen floor, tracing the pattern in the linoleum while she talked. Claire loved her hands. My mother's hands never stopped moving, folding napkins, shelling peas into a chipped ceramic bowl, holding someone's face when they cried, thumbs wiping under the eyes the way you'd wipe condensation off a window. But I noticed things too, even then, small things I did not yet have a name for. The way Daniel, once he hit his mid-20s and started working in real estate, began asking my mother pointed questions about the house over dinner. What it was worth on the current market, whether she had a will drawn up, whether she had thought about the future, a phrase he said gently, the way a man asks a question he has already decided the answer to, testing only whether she'll agree out loud. Claire was subtler, and in some ways harder to see. She started visiting more often in the months after my father died, bringing flowers from the good florist across town, bringing takeout from the restaurant my mother liked, bringing a kind of attention that had not existed the year before, not in that shape, not that consistently. My mother noticed too, though she never said an unkind word about either of them to me. She just started closing the pantry door a little more firmly whenever one of them came by, the way you close a drawer when someone walks into the room too quickly. I told myself for a long time that I was imagining all of it. Family does not calculate. Family does not sit and wait for an old woman's decline, the way you wait for a train you already know is coming, checking the schedule, making sure you're at the platform on time. I told myself that for years, Daniel started visiting on Sunday afternoons carrying a leather folder, the kind lawyers carry in television shows. He called it getting organized. He called it making things easier for everyone later. He used the word later, the way other people use the word never, saying it softly, as though the softness made it less true that he meant soon, that he meant any day now, that he meant before it was too late to matter. Claire started calling me privately in the evenings, asking whether Mom had updated anything recently. She framed it as concern, and maybe some real concern was tangled up in there somewhere. But concern does not usually arrive with a follow-up question about which bank the accounts were held at. I overheard the conversation that changed everything on a Tuesday evening in March, standing just outside my mother's kitchen door, the same door with the creaking floorboard. Except this time I stood very still on purpose so it would not creak beneath me. Daniel and Claire were inside. My mother was resting upstairs, and they had assumed, correctly for once, that no one else was in the house. "She's not going to last the year," Daniel said, his voice flat, businesslike, the voice he uses on phone calls with clients. "We need her to sign the transfer now, while she's still lucid enough that nobody can challenge it later. Once she's not, it gets complicated." "And if Robert finds out?" Claire said. "Not worried exactly, practical. Robert thinks paperwork is boring," Daniel said. "He'll thank us when it's simple. He always just wants things to be simple." I did not walk in. I did not confront them. I stood very still in the hallway, one hand flat against the wall, and I listened to my own two children discuss my mother's death as though it were a scheduling problem, a logistics issue to be managed before a deadline closed. And I felt something in me go quiet and cold and very, very clear, the way a room feels right after a window breaks, before anyone speaks. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. Simple. Organized. Transfer. I stood there in the dark hallway and translated their business language back into what it actually meant, and what it meant was that they were waiting for her to die so they could stop pretending to wait. I said nothing to my mother that night. I said nothing to my wife when I got home. I sat in my car in our driveway for 40 minutes with the engine off, watching the porch light flicker against the windshield, because I did not yet trust my own face to walk inside. I started doing small things after that, without telling anyone why. I started keeping my own copies of anything my mother signed, quietly, tucking photographs of documents into a folder on my phone she never knew existed. I started showing up to her house unannounced, at different times of day, so that no one else could assume they had a clear field to work in. I never told her what I had overheard. I simply became, without any explanation at all, a harder man to work around. I had realized something that week that I have never said out loud until this moment. To my own children, I had become invisible, not unloved exactly, not in a way either of them would have admitted to. Just irrelevant to the calculation. A father who did not factor into the math they were quietly doing about the house, the accounts, the timeline of a woman's remaining months. And invisibility, I discovered that spring, is not only a wound a man carries. It can also be a place to hide while he gets ready. My mother died in October on a Thursday, with rain against the windows and the smell of her cedar shelves still filling the house like she'd only just stepped out. I was the one who found the wooden box. It was in her bedroom closet, not the pantry anymore, wrapped in a blue scarf I remembered her wearing to church every Easter for as long as I could remember. Inside was a letter addressed to me in her handwriting and a business card for a man named Arthur Whitfield, an estate attorney downtown, someone I had never once heard her mention in my entire life. The letter read, "Robert, if you are reading this, then it is time for you to understand what I built while everyone else was busy waiting. Call Arthur. He is known for 11 years. I did not tell you sooner because I needed you to grieve me honestly, not strategically. Go now. before your brain fills the silence with your own doubts. Love, Mom. I called him the next morning. Arthur Whitfield's office smelled like old paper and mint tea. Nothing like a courtroom, more like a quiet study where a patient man reads slowly. He told me my mother had come to him 11 years earlier, not long after my father's funeral, and set up an irrevocable trust holding the house, her savings, and a modest stock portfolio she had built up in secret over decades. The trust named me as trustee. It named my children as beneficiaries, but only under conditions she herself had written, conditions no one but her could ever have altered. And she was gone now, which meant those terms were permanent, sealed, finished. She saw this coming, Arthur said, not unkindly, sliding a folder across his desk toward me. Mothers usually see more than we give them credit for. She told me, the very first meeting, that she wasn't worried about dying. She was worried about being rushed. He explained what my children had actually been trying for 2 full years to get her to sign. A quit-claim deed. A direct transfer of the house into their 2 names, bypassing the trust entirely, based on the assumption that no trust existed at all. If she had signed it, believing their story about making things simpler, the trust protections would have meant nothing, overridden by a newer document. She never signed it. Not once, across 2 years of Sunday folders and gentle, patient pressure. She let them believe she might, right up until the day she couldn't be pressured anymore. That evening, I stood in the same spot outside what used to be her kitchen, now technically my responsibility as trustee, and I listened to Daniel and Claire talking in the driveway, not realizing how clearly their voices carried through the old screen door. The house alone is worth $640,000, Daniel said, some calculator already running behind his eyes. Once probate clears, we split it and we're done. There's no will, though, Claire said. Doesn't that mean it just goes through Dad? Dad doesn't even know what a trust is, Daniel said, and I could hear the smile in it. We'll handle it. We always handle it. I went home that night, sat at my own kitchen table, and sent Arthur a text with exactly 2 words. Ready, proceed. That night, in their separate houses, my children went to sleep certain they had already won something that had never, at any point, actually been available to take. Arthur laid it out for me in plain language over the following weeks. No legal jargon, no shortcuts, just a steady, patient explanation the way you'd explain something to someone you respected. As trustee, I held full legal authority over the trust's assets for the remainder of my lifetime. My mother's written conditions specified that Daniel and Claire would receive their distributions only after I passed, and only if neither of them had attempted through fraud, pressure, or coercion to obtain trust assets outside its terms while she or I were still living. Their 2 years of pressure on my mother, documented through her own private notes and through Arthur's file, already violated that condition in plain black and white. My mother had built a door that opened only one way, and she had built it because she trusted that I would be the one still holding the key when the time finally came for someone to try the handle. Around this time, Daniel invited me to lunch, the kind of lunch where he orders for both of us without asking, the way he does when he wants to seem generous instead of controlling. He talked about how tired I must be, handling all of Grandma's stuff. He offered, almost casually, to take the house off my hands, said he'd give me market value, family discount, said it the way you offer someone a favor you've already decided they need. I said, I'll think about it. Claire called that same week, softer than Daniel, mentioning how much her kids missed their grandfather, how it would mean so much to everyone if I made things right with the house before the holidays came around. There was a long pause on the line after she said it, as though she were waiting for me to fill the silence with agreement. I told her the same thing. I'll think about it. I have learned. Over these last months, That 4 quiet words can hold an entire negotiation in place without ever tipping your hand. My youngest granddaughter, Daniel's daughter, is 8 years old. She asked me once, completely out of nowhere, sitting on my porch steps with a juice box, why her dad seemed angry every single time he got off the phone with me. I told her that grown-up things are sometimes complicated, and that none of it, not one piece of it, was because of anything she had done. She hugged me longer than usual that afternoon, her arms tight around my neck, and I remember thinking that children notice far more than we ever give them credit for. I spent one night alone at my mother's house. Before the locks changed formally into the trust's name, I sat in her kitchen with the lights off, the moon coming in pale through the window over the sink, listening for the floorboard by the back door, waiting for a creak that I knew, this time, would never come again. I let myself want, just for one quiet hour, a different version of all of this. I wished this were different. I wish my children had been the kind of son and daughter who called because they missed my voice, not because they were quietly tracking a probate timeline in a leather folder. I wish Daniel had asked about that house because he loved the smell of cedar drifting out of it, not because of what a real estate listing would say it was worth. I wish Claire's flowers had meant only what flowers are supposed to mean, no calculation folded in underneath the ribbon. But wishes don't hold up in a courtroom, and they don't hold up at a kitchen table either. What my mother built does. I cried that night, sitting alone in her dark kitchen, not from weakness, from finally understanding all the way down to the floor what she had known for years and had never once made me carry until the exact moment I was ready to hold it. Have you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, even when every part of you wanted to speak up? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to turn. It was 11:50 p.m. on a Tuesday when Arthur called to finalize the paperwork that would formally close the fraudulent transfer clause against Daniel and Claire, converting their inheritance permanently into a structured, delayed distribution. One they could not touch, alter or accelerate no matter what they tried next. My house was completely quiet. My wife was asleep down the hall, the hallway light off, the dishwasher humming its last cycle in the kitchen below me. The only light on anywhere in the house was my laptop screen, throwing a pale blue glow across the same kitchen table where, 11 years earlier and 3 weeks ago both, my children had told me to stop calling them. Arthur walked me through each page over video, calm, unhurried, the way a surgeon might describe a routine procedure he has performed 1,000 times before and trusts completely. "This isn't about punishing them," he said, adjusting his glasses on the screen. "It's about finishing what your mother started. She trusted you to close the door she opened. That's all this is, Robert. Nothing more." I read every page slowly. I did not rush, even though it was late, even though my eyes had started to ache from the screen. I thought about the wooden cigar box on the pantry shelf, about a woman who had spent 11 quiet years waiting patiently for a moment she would never live to see. I signed. The timestamp on the final document read 12:03 a.m. I'm 59 years old. I'm the trustee of my mother's estate, and as of that single signature, I am also, for the first time in 11 years, no longer waiting for anyone's permission to protect what she built with her own 2 hands. Across town, in his own dark house, Daniel was almost certainly asleep already, dreaming, maybe, about a $640,000 house he genuinely believed was already halfway into his name. He'll find out otherwise in about 9 hours. When his real estate agent calls to tell him the title search has come, back with an irrevocable trust attached to the property, one that predates his entire plan by nearly a decade, one that no one on his side of the family had ever bothered to account for, I closed the laptop, sat in the dark a moment longer, and for the first time in months, I slept the whole night through. The occasion was my granddaughter's 9th birthday, 3 days later, At Daniel's house. Balloons tied crookedly to the mailbox, a bounce house slowly deflating in the corner of the backyard, the smell of grilled hot dogs drifting over the fence. Daniel pulled me aside near the garage, his voice low, his jaw doing the thing it does when he wants something and is trying hard not to show it. "The agent called about the house," he said, glancing past me toward the house as though checking who might overhear. "Said there's some kind of trust issue attached to the title. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "I'll think about it," I said. His phone rang in his back pocket right at that moment, an almost cinematic piece of timing that even Arthur later admitted he couldn't have scripted better. Daniel stepped a few feet away to answer it, and I watched his shoulders drop inch by inch as the agent on the other end explained, patiently and clearly, that the property was held inside an irrevocable trust with distribution terms that predated any transfer attempt by exactly 9 years, terms that could not be broken by a quitclaim deed signed under pressure from a dying woman who, as it turned out, had never actually signed anything at all. He looked at me across the driveway like I was still the person he thought I was. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 11 years, not since the day I first stood outside a creaking kitchen door and quietly decided to become someone he could no longer predict, no longer manage, no longer schedule around. Claire found me by the drinks table a few minutes later, her face pale under the string lights, already having received the exact same call from her end of things. She didn't ask me a single question. She just looked at me the way you look at a locked door you were absolutely certain, right up until that second, that you still held the key to. I did not gloat. I did not explain myself, and I did not need to. I ate a slice of birthday cake, wished my granddaughter a happy year with my whole heart, and drove home before the sky started to darken. My mother used to say, "Paper doesn't mean anything until the day it does, Robert. Then it means everything." I always thought she meant that documents were simply dry and unimportant, right up until some distant, unlikely future need arrived to explain them. She meant something else entirely. She meant that real love, if it is honest, prepares quietly for the day someone tries to take advantage of the very people who are too kind or too trusting to see it coming. Daniel and Claire will still receive their full inheritance one day, exactly as my mother always intended, on the terms she wrote in her own hand, on the timeline she alone chose. Nothing was ever truly taken from either of them. Only the shortcut was taken away, the one built on the quiet assumption that grief makes people careless enough not to notice. Arthur still manages the trust alongside me, and he calls twice a year now just to check in, the way an old, trusted friend does. As for me, I still have the house on the corner with the cedar shelves and the floorboard by the back door that still creaks in exactly the same spot it always has. I go there sometimes on quiet Sunday afternoons, alone, and I stand right by that door just to hear it groan under my own weight, the way it used to announce me, before anyone even turned around to look, and I think about her every single time, without fail. I think, some people leave you money when they go. She left me a decision already made, wrapped carefully in patience, waiting 11 years for the exact moment I would need it most. If you've ever had to quietly prepare for a betrayal you couldn't yet prove was even coming, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments below. And if this story moved you even a little, subscribe. There are more stories like this one still to come.